Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Xizhi. Coming up in this edition, the French government is facing collapse after opposition parties submitted no-confidence motions against Prime Minister Michel Barnier. The Israeli military has struck Hezbollah targets throughout Lebanon, with Lebanese authorities reporting 11 deaths from the attacks. And some African countries began intercepting migrants attempting to make dangerous crossings, which have led to rising maritime accidents. We begin in Europe. Opposition parties in France have introduced a no-confidence motion against Prime Minister Michel Barnier, pushing the French government to the brink of collapse. They acted after Barnier invoked a special constitutional power to pass a social security bill through Parliament without a vote. Barnier has urged lawmakers not to support the no-confidence vote. Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
Well, a very dramatic day on Monday in Paris when the Prime Minister Michel Barnier used special executive powers to force the 2025 budget legislation through Parliament. However, if you do that in France, it does open you up to the possibility of facing no confidence votes. Now, Michel Barnier says the French budget that he and his government have proposed is reasonable, is proportionate. It envisages some $60 billion worth of extra funds coming from $40 billion worth of spending cuts, $20 billion worth of tax rises. However, the left wing, some lawmakers in the centre and the right and far right have been up in arms for weeks about the budget. They say it goes too far and they have been demanding concessions from Michel Barnier. Now, time is tight because France has to approve the 2025 budget before we get to next year, so there's only a few weeks left. However, that budget legislation being forced through Parliament means that there are now no confidence votes on the horizon for the Prime Minister. The left wing and the far right both submitting motions of no confidence on Monday in Paris, and they will now be processed through Parliament, and it's likely that on Wednesday lawmakers will get the chance to vote on those motions. If either one of them passes, Michel Barnier, the French Prime Minister, will be left with no option but to resign. He will submit his letter of resignation to the President, who can either accept it, who could reappoint Mr Barnier, or could look for another Prime Minister. Lots of uncertainty at the moment. Sources close to Emmanuel Macron on Monday saying that he has just been urging MPs to look for stability. That's all he wants for the country. But the Parliament here in France is split into blocks well short of a majority. The left, the centre and the far right, no one is near to a majority. However, it does seem that France's government on Monday could well be on the brink of collapse because there does seem to be a majority of lawmakers ready to vote in favour of one of those motions of no confidence, bringing down the French government.
That is Ross Cullen in Paris. In Germany, Volkswagen assembly lines are at a standstill after workers walked off the job. This comes as the biggest European automaker is facing financial pressures amid the higher costs and a falling market share in China. Trent Murray has more from Berlin.
Tens of thousands of workers at 9 Volkswagen factories across the country walked off the job as a bitter wage dispute between unions and the company management intensifies. Volkswagen is facing significant financial pressures. Its latest Q3 profits plummeted 64% and it's trying to slash costs. As part of those plans, it wants to try and cut its wage bill by 10%, a proposal that has angered its heavily unionised workforce, who stopped work as part of their so-called first warning strike, promising more action could be to come. VW's challenges are ones being felt across the broader German auto industry. High energy costs for production, high labour costs when compared to places like China and India, and stringent EU regulations, all combining to raise very real questions about whether Europe's biggest economy has structural competitiveness issues. And the once lucrative Chinese market is proving difficult for German brands. Before the pandemic, German automakers commanded close to 25% market share in China, but that has now dropped to around 15% and continues to fall amid tough competition from homegrown brands like BYD, NIO and XPeng. And there are signs that competition is also increasing here in Europe. Chinese EV leaders have made no secret of their desire to expand their footprint here in the EU. And while some EU countries have favoured tariffs in order to try and protect their local industry, the German government has taken a very different approach, voting against Brussels' protectionism plan, saying Europe doesn't need the best tariffs, it needs better vehicles with better technology that can better compete with the new Chinese arrivals.
That was Trent Murray reporting on Volkswagen strike. Turning to the Middle East, fighting continues between Syrian government forces and rebels. The Syrian army says it has repelled a major offensive in the northern countryside of Hama province. It adds that it has regained control of key areas. The army says its operations in Aleppo and Idlib over the past 24 hours eliminated hundreds of militants. The rebels have taken large parts of Aleppo and the southern parts of Idlib, claiming to have captured Aleppo International Airport. The heavy fighting has forced some residents to flee.
Leaving Aleppo is very dangerous now because people have to take another unsafe route, passing through areas where extremist groups could appear at any moment. This is especially true after the opposition forces recently took control of the area, as there is always a risk of being targeted by snipers.
The protracted war in northern Syria has also forced displaced Syrians who returned from Lebanon to make new decisions. Many of them are determined not to leave home and ready to bear the economic hardship, cold weather and renewed hostilities. Haidar Kazwini has more from western Syria.
Sunlight is the only source of warmth after spending a freezing night in a doorless and a windowless house. 47-year-old Zakaria sought safety in his homeland, fleeing escalation between Hezbollah and Israel, after spending 11 years as a refugee in Lebanon. For those returnees from Lebanon, the return comes with a cost. Signs of civil war can be seen on almost every house in this neighborhood, which hosts more than 120 families coming from Lebanon.
When I returned, I found nothing was left in my house. The house was uninhabitable. No doors, no windows, no electricity, no water. All lifelines are missing. How can we get by in winter?
Zakaria is now jobless and spends his time draping tarpaulins on the windows of his house, hoping to shield his family from the crawling winter. Sounds of Air Force jets heading north are clearly heard, and this adds another layer of concern to Zakaria's new life. But he still believes that return to Lebanon is not on the table, whatever the repercussions might be.
I have no intention of going to Lebanon. I always wanted to return home. This is our homeland. Whatever happens, we will stay. We can't forsake our country as it needs us now, so we will not quit on it.
The houses in this neighborhood are marred by years of conflict and desertion. The serenity is broken as sounds of air jets and bombing in nearby Hama has already been heard for the first time in years. In addition, the news coming from the north is not good. A new round of fights has begun. That keeps people here on the edge. Stories of suffering are abundant here, as the number of Syrian returnees is big. But each story tells its own type of suffering. Khatar is a mother of 5. She fled Lebanon with her disabled husband. And now she is struggling to not only repair her house, but also make ends meet. There is no income, only aid.
This is our homeland and our house. We decided to repair our house and stay here. My children want to come back to join the military and serve their country. We hope to get assistance to repair our house so that my children can return and live here. What we need now is safety and our country to become safe like it used to be.
In light of the fall of Aleppo, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, while meeting with the Iranian foreign minister, said that Syria as a state, army and people united is going ahead to fight terrorist organization with all strength and determination and on all its territories. More than 400,000 Syrian refugees have returned to Syria from Lebanon, fleeing the deadly confrontations between Hezbollah and Israel. The ceasefire has gone into effect in Lebanon. However, Many of these returnees still believe that their homeland is the only place where they can find sanctuary and safety, although rebuilding their lives in a war-torn country like Syria is fraught with numerous obstacles and risks. On top comes the possibility of re-escalation and the crippled services.
That was Haida Kazwini reporting. Elsewhere in the Middle East, the Israeli military says it has struck dozens of Hezbollah targets throughout Lebanon. Lebanese authorities say 11 people were killed in the attacks. The Israeli strikes came after Hezbollah accused Israel of violating a ceasefire agreement and fired missiles on an Israeli military position. The Israeli military reported no casualties, but the Prime Minister vowed a strong response. Hezbollah says the attack was the group's first operation since the ceasefire deal took effect in retaliation for repeated violations of the truce by Israel. Many Israeli and Lebanese residents have begun to return home since the ceasefire came into effect, but many residents may not have a home to return to. Jonathan Regev has more.
Kiryat Shmona is Israel's northernmost city. It lies in the valley with the Lebanon border up on the hill, an aerial distance of just about a mile. Being the border town that it is, Kiryat Shmona suffered more than any other city in all of Israel's conflicts with its northern neighbor. This time was no exception. The damage is seen at every corner, but along with it, there's also hope. Right next to the burnt buses are also running buses and passengers in the station. City officials believe this is the beginning of return to normalcy.
A lot of people start coming back, business start to open again. And I know that as long as the ceasefires will continue, we are start to planning the coming back of all the city.
It is a very slow process as there is plenty of work to be done, especially in the field of housing. Tens of homes took direct hits from Hezbollah rockets, hundreds of which were fired on the city over the last year, leaving craters on the ground. So, returning home may not be so simple and fast.
They will get rent salary from the government, and they can rent, or if they want to stay in the hotels for a few months until they recover their houses.
Slowly, gradually, the residents of Kiryat Shmona and the other northern communities may choose to come back home, but many of them will find their homes just like this one behind me, meaning even those who choose to return may not have a place to come back to.
That was Jonathan Regev reporting. Then in North America, the first big snowfall of the season is blanketing towns in upstate New York as the busy holiday travel and shopping weekend comes to an end in the United States. Snow warnings are in effect in parts of Ohio, New York and Pennsylvania. Officials said the heavy snow could persist into next week and cause hazards in the Great Lakes, Plains and Midwest regions. John Terrett reports from New York.
Here in New York City, it's cold, but we're snow-free for now. But a couple of 100 miles to the northwest, it's a very different story. It won't stop snowing. This is lake-effect snow, caused by freezing conditions flowing down from Canada and across the inland oceans that are the Great Lakes of North America. Lake-effect snow can double the amount that gets dumped on the states surrounding the Great Lakes. There's a reason why they're known as the snow states. More than 5 feet or 154 centimeters has fallen on western New York State, according to the National Weather Service. There's heavy snowfall forecast for parts of western New York, northwestern Ohio and northwestern Pennsylvania. Forecasters are predicting nearly 70% of the continental United States will see below average temperatures through the end of the week. Here in New York, we know the chances of a white Christmas are looking up.
That was John Terrett on the snowfall in the United States. Finally, in Africa, the number of maritime accidents involving African migrants has increased in the second half of the year. Over 2,000 people have been reported dead or missing over the past year. A number of African countries have started intercepting migrants attempting to make dangerous crossings. Robert Nagila has more.
It's been described as the deadliest single incident this year involving migrant sea crossings in East Africa, the Horn of Africa and Yemen. The International Organization for Migration says at least 48 people lost their lives in this tragedy, which occurred just off the coast of Djibouti on October 1st, when the boat they were traveling on capsized. 115 people were rescued and over 100 were recorded missing. On November 4th, the IOM reported that 24 people died after a boat sank off the coast of the Comoros Islands. 3 weeks later, on November 24th, 22 people died after the 2 boats that were carrying them capsized off the coast of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. And on November 26th, in the Aegean Sea, 8 migrants died and 39 were rescued after their boats sank. So why the sudden spike in migrant sea crossings? The IOM says a number of factors have contributed to the increase this year, including political, economic, climate change and conflict-related issues. The migrants use 3 main routes: the Central Mediterranean route to Italy and Malta, the Western Mediterranean route to Spain, and the Eastern Mediterranean route to Greece and Cyprus. But many do not reach their intended destination. Just over 2,000 people were reported dead or missing on the 3 Mediterranean routes this year, according to the IOM. In October, Senegal's Navy said it had intercepted at least 600 people attempting to cross to the Canary Islands. And in late November, Libyan military officials announced they had detained over 300 people intending to cross the Mediterranean Sea. Unfortunately, there appears to be no end in sight to the number of migrants determined to attempt the dangerous crossings.
That was Robert Nagilet reporting. Now recapping the headlines, the French government is facing collapse after opposition parties submitted no confidence motions against Prime Minister Michel Barnier. The Israeli military has struck Hezbollah targets throughout Lebanon, with Lebanese authorities reporting 11 deaths from the attacks. And some African countries began intercepting migrants attempting to make dangerous crossings, which have led to rising maritime accidents. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.